In this video, I'm going to discuss Britain's role in the Israel-Palestine conflict, starting with over 100 years ago in 1915. During World War I in 1915, Britain was trying to extend their influence over to the Arab land. At that time, the Arab land was ruled by the Turkish Empire, otherwise known as Ottoman Empire. In a series of letters between 1915 to 1916, they offered their support for Arab independence in return for Arabs to be on their side to support Britain in World War I and to fight against the Ottoman Empire, who was ruling over basically all the Arab land at that time. The Arabs said yes, so hereby the Arab land was promised to the Arabs on as much as Britain can do. In 1917, Britain extended another offer to the Jewish people to make Palestine into a Jewish homeland in return for their support during World War I. Later on in 1917, after they made that promise, otherwise known as a Balfour Declaration to the Jewish people, in 1917, later they captured it. In 1920, they started setting up civilian administration. In 1922, the League of Nations, which is a former version of what we have currently, otherwise known as the UN, the United Nations. The League of Nations is just the old version of that, slightly different. The League of Nations gave Britain a mandate. They gave them this mandate to actually look after Palestine and to make it into a Jewish homeland. That's what the League of Nations, the UN, actually ratified in law in 1922. They gave Britain a mandate to make Palestine into a Jewish homeland. In 1936, just skipping a few years ahead now, but in 1936, the Arabs started revolting. They said, no, there was revolts all along, but in 1936 to 1939, this was a big revolt, a really big revolt, and said, we want to have control over this land. So what did the British do? Because there was so much violence, what they did was they decided to break the promise that they made in the Balfour Declaration. They decided to break the mandate that the League of Nations, that the UN gave them in 1922. What they did, they did a commission, otherwise known as a Peel Commission, 1937, a year after this revolt started in 1936. They said, we're going to do this commission, we're going to look into it, we're going to come back, and we're going to make a new suggestion. We're not going to give it all to the Jews, we'll make a new suggestion. And in 1937, what did they do? They offered the Jews, they said, listen, you've got Palestine, we're going to give you 17% of the land. There'll be a few international cities that we're going to control, such as Jerusalem, and the rest is going to go all to the Arabs. Now, the Jews, they were supposed to get the whole land, but what did they say? Okay, we'll take it. We just want any land. 17% is better than nothing. 17% is much less than 100, but still, we want just give us any land. That's all we want. 17%, we'll take it. What did the Arabs say? The Arabs said no, right? So this was led by the Arab High Committee, who was in charge of Palestinian nationalism. What did they say? They said no because they wanted a one-state solution. They were very fierce, so they were against Jewish immigration, they wanted a one-state Arab solution with not much Jews in there, and they hated the Jews. They literally hated the Jews. How do I know that? Because a leader of that Arab High Committee, otherwise known as the Grand Mufti of Jerusalem, Hajj Amin al-Hussein, in World War II, during the Holocaust, he went up to Hitler and said, if you support Palestine as an Arab state, what we will do is we will support you in your mission to kill the Jews and what you're doing as well. But what we also want is for you to support us to deal with the Jewish problem in Palestine, just like you have dealt with the Jewish problem in Germany. So does that mean he wanted to expel all the Jews, or does that mean he wanted to kill all the Jews? Who knows? But he didn't like the Jews, right? This is a guy in charge of the Arab High Committee, in charge of Palestinian nationalism. He also, by the way, in another time, this guy, the Grand Mufti of Jerusalem, Hajj Amin al-Hussein, on a separate occasion, he went on a radio and said to all the Arabs who are listening, kill the Jews wherever you can find them. So he was pretty anti-Semitic, pretty vile guy, not a nice guy at all. So they said no. Jews get 17%? No, they shouldn't get anything. And not only should they not get anything, we shouldn't even let them in. We should wipe them. There were some pretty bad stuff. The revolt started in 1936. We got to 1939, and the British were just fed up, right? They were fed up, and also World War II was coming. They knew World War II was coming in a couple of months. So what did Britain say? They said, the League of Nations, we know the League of Nations gave us this mandate that the Jewish people should get a homeland. And we know in the Peel Commission we offered 2 years ago in 1937 that the Jews should get 17%. But although the Jews accepted it, the Arabs rejected it. And the Arabs have continued to fight with violence, and a lot of our soldiers have been killed, and we want the Arabs to actually be on our side during World War II because World War II was coming up. They said, what we're going to do, we're just going to give the Arabs almost everything they want so they can be on our side during World War II and the violence dies down. Britain offered the Arab all of Palestine to become one Arab state. And what does that mean? Over the next 5 years, only 15,000 people, Jews a year, can immigrate to Palestine. And also, Jewish land purchases will be severely limited. So they can only really buy from around 5% of the land. So Jewish land purchases severely limited. Jewish immigration severely limited, only 15,000 a year, so totaling 75,000 altogether. And after those 5 years, by the way, it's totally up to the Arabs how much Jews they wanted to let in, which basically meant none. And then after that, in 10 years' time, then the land goes to the Arabs. What the British were proposing to the Arabs were basically, you get this land and you do whatever the hell you want to the Jews. You say only 5%, they can only buy land from 5%. Maybe you can stop them coming in at all, whatever you want. Just, we want you to have this land and you support us during World War II. Now, of course, the Jews rejected that. We accepted 17%. We just want something, right? But to give us nothing, that's slightly unacceptable. So the Jews said, of course, no, we're not going to accept that, and we're going to fight for that. We're going to fight for the land that was promised to us by the League of Nations, that was promised to us by Britain. No, we're going to say no. We accepted 17%, but 0% is not an option. What do the Arabs say? The Arabs also rejected it. This was once again by the Arab High Committee. They said no. Why did they say no? Because they didn't it wasn't radical enough for them. What do you mean, stopping Jewish immigration only in 5 years? Another 75,000 Jews to come along? No way, that is not happening. We want a total, immediate ban to Jewish people living between Jewish people immigrating between the river to the sea. Now, the violence didn't stop. There was still a lot of fighting. For example, during the Holocaust, 6 million Jews were murdered. They were mass murdered in cold blood. Now, do you think the British or do you think that the Arabs would say, listen, we can see how bad it is. Maybe you can come in and we'll let a few people in, we'll try and help you. Not a chance in the world. The Jews had to really fight the British, really had to fight the Arabs to actually allow more immigrants and save more Jewish immigrants to come into the land and to run away from Hitler. World War II finishes in 1945, and there is still no solution to this conflict. It's still happening. So the British say, listen, we can't deal with it anymore. In 1947, they said to the League of Nations, which has now became the UN, they said, here, you take the Israel problem. We don't want to deal with it. So they gave it to the UN, and the UN said, okay, we're going to inquire into it. A few months later, they came back and said, we're going to give 55% to the Jews and around 40%, 45% to the Arabs, and like, Jerusalem will be an international zone. Jews said yes. Arabs, the next day, they launched a full revolt. It lasted quite a few months, where, start of the Nakba, where a lot of Arabs were expelled from their homes in what would be the 55% of the Jewish homeland, and a lot of them, quite the majority, ran away out of fear of being killed, out of fear what might happen to them. 6 months later, after the civil war started, they announced their independence as a Jewish state, Israel as a Jewish state. Oh, let me go back a bit. So after the UN passes the partition plan, the British are still there. They're going to be there for another 6 months. Now, the British are supposed to try and enforce this partition plan. They said, no, we're not going to enforce it. They didn't want to enforce it because it looked too good for the Jews. And they wanted the Arabs, they wanted to be in good terms with the Arabs. They needed the Suez Canal, they needed the oil. So have you seen the zigzag up and down that the British have gone through? 1915 to 1916, they promised Arab independence. 1917, they offered Palestine as a Jewish homeland. 1922, the UN solidifies Palestine as a Jewish homeland. In 1937, the British say, no, we're not going to keep to that. We'll only do 17% as a Jewish homeland. In 1939, they say, we're going to make 100% as an Arab homeland. In 1947, after it gets past the UN, when the UN petition plan, no, we're not going to enforce it. They've gone along a really big zigzag line. But that's the history of Britain in the Israel-Palestine conflict. What do you think?